Hello, and welcome to today's webcast on 4 Steps to Simplify Capital Planning in Senior Living. I'm Lois Bowers, Senior Editor of McKnight Senior Living, and I'll be your moderator. Long-range capital budgeting for senior living communities has become an essential strategy for long-term success, but sometimes it seems difficult to understand. That's why we're pleased to have with us today Amy Brom, Capital Projects and Facilities Administrative Assistant at Clark Retirement Community, and Josh Malbagat, Director of Senior Living at Dude Solutions, provider of the Works Hub. They will share best practices for capital budgeting as well as one senior living community's experience with the process. We'll hear from Amy and Josh in a few moments, but first we have some housekeeping matters to take care of. First, I'd like to let you know that today's slides are available for download. To download them, please see the red Resources tab on the upper right part of your screen. And if you think you're experiencing audio difficulties with this broadcast, please first check the volume control on your computer. We found that this is the most common cause of hearing issues with presentations like this one. The sound should come from your computer speakers. If the volume control doesn't appear to be the issue, then please click the red Test Your Connection button under the slides. If necessary, click the Chat Live button on the Test Your Connection page to receive additional assistance. Please also keep only one browser window open on your computer to prevent echo. Also, we will have time for questions and answers at the end of today's presentation. If you have any questions about the information presented, please feel free to send them directly to us at any time during this hour by entering them into the Ask a Question box below the slides and clicking on the red Submit button. Today's program is made possible by support from Dude Solutions, provider of the Works Hub. Please visit the company website at www.dudesolutions.com. Finally, this session will be archived and available on demand shortly after this live broadcast. You can access the webcast again at no cost, and others can experience it for the first time, again at no cost, by simply going to the registration page to enter this studio. The web address is mcknightseniorliving.com/May30webinar. You also can use the link you received via email or can visit our website, mcknightseniorliving.com, and click on Events in the navigation bar at the top of the page and then on Webcasts in the drop-down menu. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit more about today's featured speakers. Amy Brom is Capital Projects and Facilities Administration Assistant at Clark Retirement Community in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She began her career in senior living and care in 1993, working as a nurse aide in skilled nursing. She joined Clark Retirement Community in 2008, serving in various roles until joining the Capital Projects and Facilities Management Department as the team's administrative assistant in 2012. Amy's role at Clark includes managing work orders, tracking assets, scheduling preventive maintenance, assisting the capital projects manager with project coordination, and financial tracking for operational and capital budgets. Today's other speaker, Josh Malbagat, is Director of Senior Living at Dude Solutions, provider of the Works Hub. Josh has worked with more than 1,000 senior living communities in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom throughout his career. He specializes in operations challenges unique to senior living communities. Josh frequently speaks at industry conferences on topics ranging from benchmarking to capital planning with an emphasis on senior living and operational excellence. We're pleased to have both him and Amy here with us today. I've taken a peek at their slides, and I can tell you that they have a lot of helpful information to share. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Amy and Josh so they can begin their presentation.
Thanks, Lois. I really appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh, and with me is Amy. We're really excited to work with you today. So, from kind of an agenda perspective, there we go, wanted to start with a quick poll, which I'll get to in a second, and then give you some kind of our feel of the state of capital planning within senior living to give us kind of the baseline of where we're typically starting from, and then get into 4 steps to capital planning. So using the work that we've done with literally hundreds of operators to formulate some suggestions that hopefully you can use, some thoughts, ideas, that type of thing, and then finish up with an actual kind of case study, a review with Amy of how things have gone with Clark Retirement and the project that she's undertaken, and getting some tips from the field from her, talking about what the successes were and what some of the things to watch for might be if you were to undertake these things yourself. To kick us off, though, what I'd like is just an idea of where we sit right now. So put up a poll here, looking at kind of where our audience or our participants here kind of sit in terms of your current capital planning or budgeting process. So looking at, do you feel like you're really solid, you're in perfect shape, just so-so, rough shape, you've got a plan, but, it's kind of a little iffy or non-existent. No shame here. If it's non-existent, that's, first step is understanding where you sit. So we'll give you a second or two to fill that in. And then should be able to post those results. Get those up there. All right. So that just gives us an idea of where we sit right now. Find that, it's interesting to know where your peers are. One of the topics that I talk a lot on are benchmarking, and a key is knowing kind of where everyone else is. So having seen that, let's dive in to the actual results, or not, the actual current state. So through the work that we've done, we focus on software solutions specific to senior living communities. So we talk with a lot of facilities directors, CFOs, executive directors, regional directors of operations, and through that, we found some really common trends. So number one, right now, less than 10% of communities surveyed have a 20-year capital plan. I was pretty surprised by that when we started to dig into it. Lots of communities are doing 1, 2-year, maybe 3-year plans, but not many are looking out 20 years into the future. And the challenge with that is there are some pretty major expenses that kind of hit you at the 10, 15-year cycle points, some major air handling unit, roofing, building structure, things like that. And if you parallel that with the average age of communities out there being anywhere from 20 to 40 years, you start to get an idea of just looking a few years out kind of have some issues. And those that had a plan reported that it was static, meaning it's a binder maybe of results that sits on a desk and gathers dust, or it's a Word doc or something like that. And then as we dug into the actual reports that we could get and reviews of equipment that we've done, found that about 20% of capital equipment that's in service right now is past its replacement date. We're basically working on borrowed time. And coupled with that, I found a study that talked about kind of the challenge we have overall in senior living for some of our older communities, and there are a fair number of them, even with all the new construction going on, that about 20% of senior living communities could be obsolete by the end of the year in terms of the cost to address all of the deferred maintenance versus the cost to renovate or reposition and rebuild. So what does that mean when we think about this? Budgetary decisions are often being made off gut feelings versus quantifiable data. When it comes time to decide which capital project we undertake, we don't have a plan. A lot of the time, it's the loudest voice or the newest, coolest thing that takes precedence, which leaves really important core building equipment, structural components unattended to. And that's when we get into those obsolete areas. When breakdowns do occur, we're not prepared and costs go up. It becomes much more expensive to fix things in an emergency. Think about, what's the consequence of losing hot water, losing heat, losing air conditioning in the summer. There are significant operational costs that we get hit with to address those issues. If we've got a clear picture of what's coming and can actually replace items before we hit those catastrophic moments, we don't spend it as much. And then that drives into the long-term viability of properties. If we let deferred maintenance mount to such a degree, we can't dig ourselves out of it. And then we've got the negative effects on resident safety and satisfaction. So a key point here being that every time we've got to do these rush jobs or we have things that happen that impact the resident, we're letting our residents down, and that's who we're here to serve, really. So we've got to consider those elements as we get into this. So, and then higher operational expenses when we actually go to address these issues. So the typical approach that we see, this is with the 90% of folks who don't necessarily have a real plan. You've got needs that people put together, and you've got operational data. What are you spending on things? How much you spend on repairs for a particular unit, things like that. And there's usually a wall between those. The operational data is stored either in someone's head or in a system that's not integrated with the capital plan, Excel, who knows what. And then you've got needs that are, again, stored in people's heads or on a piece of paper. Because those two are separate, really the capital plan becomes a wish list. We don't have hard facts to base things on, so we end up with Santa Claus deciding who's been naughty or nice and granting wishes. Okay, great. Therapy will get something now. So we need to kind of switch that approach. Ideally, what we really want to switch to here is the idea of breaking down the barrier between operational data and needs and setting it up so that from that, we actually drive a capital plan. So we take the facts of what we're required, not just this year, but many years out, so that we're planning into the future, combine that with the operational data of what are we spending to maintain these pieces of equipment, which items have we been putting more money than we should into, and then combining that into a true capital plan gives us a real picture of where we need to spend those limited dollars. So the idea of an isolated versus integrated plan. So in the isolated view, your plan gets created. You look at it once a year when you're planning budgets. Priorities are set based on those perceptions of what people think they want. And then maybe you go back and you update the original plan, but most of the time that's not done on a consistent basis. It's only when we hit a problem. What we really like to see and where this is going to drive to, the steps to capital planning that we're going to be talking about, is to this integrated view, where essentially what we're doing is creating that plan and then tracking the operational repair expenses and then making decisions on specific capital expenditure projects based on actual data. Think of it as a repair versus replace decision where we're able to get to the point to say, hey, we've spent 25% of the purchase cost of that air handling unit in the last 3 years. That's probably the one that we should replace if we don't have money to do all of these versus guessing at, okay, we're going to do one, I don't know which one was the last one that broke and go off that. So we want to adjust that and really drive to that concept of all of the data driving the decisions. Now, with this, just to hammer it home again, there's real importance to this capital planning. Large, unexpected expenses hurt. Imagine if you're not the CFO, having to go to the CFO and say, hey, I need $150,000 to replace that roof, or being the CFO to say, gee, I'm the one that's got to go find that now. We've got to decide how we're going to defer these projects. When we don't know what's coming and we can't plan for it, these expenses can really hurt the pocketbook. It impacts our long-term competitiveness as well. I've worked with a lot of organizations where the idea of the long-term capital plan has been forgotten about, dropped, and they've let projects that address their competitiveness, the appearance of the community, some of the exterior items, lag as they've addressed other issues, and that curb appeal isn't there anymore. And we've got lots of new builds that are going on in some areas, if we're on the assisted or IL side, that really drive that competitiveness. So we also have that idea that the property and the assets within it are our residents' homes. So we really want to be good stewards of what we're driving there. And then that idea that I've been talking about being able to do data-driven decision-making. So looking at that repair versus replace picture, having that data to pull that out. And then finally, because this is something that's really important, the compliance side. If we aren't keeping these assets up to date and staying on top of the repairs, we can face problems around compliance inspections, whether that's related to the NFPA, life safety code, anything around those kind of fields. Asset replacement schedules and failing to follow them can lead to follow-on problems with being able to keep temperature at the right level, anything like that. So, having established the importance of a capital plan, how do you get started? Faced with, you set that up when you're looking at, this big bucket of things to assess. Well, where do you go? How do you decide what you're going to do? So this is where we've kind of listed out the steps that we've seen successful organizations go through, as well as a couple of tips and tricks. So, the starting point. You need to know where you stand. So you need to know the current reality. What information do you have and what don't you have? And I'm going to give you a checklist for that. You need to decide who's going to do the work of creating the capital plan. That's something that you're going to do internally. That can be really fantastic if you've got the resources. Amy's a great case study in that. We'll get her story. Or you're going to outsource it, which can be great, but we'll talk about some of the pitfalls there. And then what are you going to do with the documentation that comes out of it? And as you'll see as we go through this, I have a huge ask to really drive to getting this in an integrated system, not just in a paper sheet or something like that. So, knowing where you're starting from. Here's a quick kind of run through that we can look at. Sorry, I'm getting a report that we've got some background feedback. Let me try switch audio here. This might make me sound a little better. We'll see if that works. So, knowing where you're starting from. I want to look at what information you have now. This is what I want you to review. We've got, do you have an inventory of your capital assets? Do you have an inventory of the major building components, roof, window, entries, things like that? Do you have the replacement costs for those? Do you have the condition that they're in, an assumed remaining life, a list of the deferred maintenance items, and then finally a repair history with the costs that you have spent on those assets. Typically, when I talk with organizations, they've got some form of this. You've got maybe inventory of a couple of the assets, maybe some are condition, you've got the condition assessment. But what we really want to look at is, holistically, do you have all of these answers? If not, that's what you're going to build to, because this is what a great capital plan includes. And you might not tackle it all at once. Amy's got some great stories she'll share about how she chunked this down. So don't think of this as, a behemoth project that you have to do everything all at once. We can chunk it out. So then you've got the question of who's going to do the work. So once you determine, where you sit, you've got a self-service option where with this, we basically look at, if we do it ourselves, we can generally do it at a lower cost because we're not paying someone. But there is a high effort. So you do want to look at, do you have the time? And if you are going to tackle it yourself, set reasonable expectations on how long it's going to take. It's not going to be a 1-month affair because you probably have other jobs on your plate. You're going to chunk it down. It might take you 6 months to get through it, maybe more. That time investment is big. And then you have to think about, do you have the expertise? Do you have someone on your team, if you're a multi-site, that can go out and do maybe all the roof assessments because they've done that in a past life? Or do you have someone internally that's really great at a particular category of asset? Maybe they can be your resource. Maybe you can use some outside contractors for these things.
but want to look at essentially, do you have the qualifications to assess those? And then you've got the historical knowledge. Want to look at, do we have the knowledge of what's happened? And on a self-service model where you're doing it self, much more likely that you will have that knowledge. It might mean interviewing people and saying, hey, when did we replace that? Well, gee, the director of nursing was pregnant with her third kid and that kid's 5, so gee, it must have been that long ago. You can start to interview people and find that there. When you get expert help, it's great, but it does come with a higher cost. So you've got low effort but higher cost because you're paying for architecture, engineer type people to come out and assess your building. They generally can do it a lot faster. This is what they do for a living. I work with folks who can do about 50,000 square feet of a building in a day, and they've got systems in place to kind of run through and real expertise. But they are going to try to mine more of that historical knowledge from you. So there's some interviewing that they do with you. So when you look at this, I'm just going to kind of put some check marks through there. You've got the idea of, if you do self-service, you might have the expertise, you might not. It's going to be cheaper, but there is going to be an investment on your end. The expert help side, there definitely is a higher cost, which can be a detriment, but you're going to get an end product a lot faster. The historical knowledge they're going to have to come and pull through for you. So when you make that decision of who's going to do the work, then you decide how you're going to log it. Now, as you'll see here, I'm not a fan of paper logs. You get the basic plan details. They're static. They're not integrated. You're not going to get a work order history of what's happened. You're not going to get that repair data. Excel, you can kind of take a step up if you can't get to the software stage. So Excel is a better way in that you can then adjust the plan, change remaining life, change assets, things like that. So it is a little bit dynamic. But again, it's not integrated into a work history because you can't get essentially what you spent to repair on something. And that then makes the actual in-year budgetary decision-making a little bit tougher. You do have version control kind of issues there, but you can get past that. So with the software now, I'll be honest, I'm a little biased because this is what I have done for 20 years, but you do get a full system that is integrated and pulls together both the repair history and the capital plan, so you can actually see what you're doing. So again, you want to really consider where you're going to store the information you get, and these days, a simple binder with the information just is not good enough. You need to have the full details integrated so that you can keep them updated. One of the reasons that I'm a huge proponent of software is that it gives you the ability to modify the plan based on reality. You can change if you're deferring something or bumping something up. And when you're talking 20 years out, that becomes an important kind of process to this, to be able to see what's coming down the road. So with those 3 chunks, the knowing where you're starting from, deciding who's going to do the work and where you're going to log it out of the way, we can actually get into creating the plan. So with this, step 1, you need to set priorities. Essentially, where are you going to go with this? So there's 3, let's say, not so easy items to address, in that if you haven't looked at these before, you've got to put your thinking cap on and figure out where you're going to go with this. You need to look at historical deficiencies. What are the projects that a building has been asking for 3 or 4 years that you've pushed off? What has the facility director been saying, I got a problem here, but we just haven't been able to fund that? Is it the boiler, the laundry equipment, whatever those items are, you want to look there. Then you want to look at the current required expenditures. So what are the things that I know we have to do in the next little while to address our kind of outstanding needs? And then you look at the future requirements. And this is where we start getting into the assessment of building assets, building components, saying this one, our roof has 10 years left on it. The air handling units have 5. You start to get into the future requirements, which gives you the long-term view there. And then within this, we need to prioritize projects. So you need to group them. I like to go with the idea of things that are urgent. Those are like the hey, if we don't do this, we might face an evacuation next year. Very important, the important, and then the discretionary, kind of breaking them down so that we've got the idea of, which are the ones that, okay, that would be nice to do, but not really sure that we need to. And then finally, the routine, the things that, we routinely are doing. If I was a life plan community, I might look at the routine things as I'm going to do a certain number of unit turns every year. On the AL side, it might be remodels or make-readies, something that I'm budgeting for there that's routine, but it's not exactly going to be defined as an asset-related project. So once we've got that, then we need to address those historical deficiencies. So I don't want to get into why we have these. There's a whole list of reasons, but they become almost like that monster under the bed if we let them get too big. These are things that we've decided to delay, we're conscious of, and then we get surprised when we get hit by big expenditures that seem to come out of the blue. We need to make sure that we've got a handle on those. We need to get a clear list of what those items are. And that can be as simple as thinking through, what is it that people keep asking for and keep saying no to? Then we need to cost each of those out and prioritize them with that list that we were talking about. So look at what is the cost to address those. And you can ask contractors for ideas. You can come up with ideas, but you want to get at least a rough cost in there. And then consider the full return on the replacement. So this comes into play when you're looking at what is the current cost to maintain whatever this item is. Am I spending 20% of the cost for replacement on repairs every year? Does that change the picture of whether I should replace it sooner or not? Because I'm in that situation of throwing good money after bad, essentially. And that's where, again, you want to leverage that historical work and repair cost history data so that you're pulling out the information. And then finally, or not finally, step 3, we're in the middle still. We want to create the plan, though. This is where then we've got that deferred maintenance piece addressed. So now we start to look at, okay, how do we get into more of the meat here? So number 1, we need to collect, inspect, and assess. So we need to get together all the assets and the building components. We need to establish what their condition is. Is it good, fair, medium, poor? Some kind of grading system that then addresses the remaining life. What's the replacement cost? What is it actually going to cost us to replace this? Thinking not just about the replacement cost of the asset, but also the removal cost of what's there. The installation cost. Sometimes those can significantly add to the cost of addressing these issues. So once we've gotten all that info, we want to assemble it, prioritize it, and consolidate it. So we're doing, again, that step of prioritizing things, deciding where they fit within years. If you've got an outside source that you're using for this, they generally take on all of that for you to give you their recommended priorities. You're doing it yourself, you need to put some thinking into that. And then you need to maintain this. And this, again, is where I would say, if 10% of people have a 20-year plan, probably not even half of those folks keep track of what they're spending on the repairs, so they miss out on that added benefit of being able to leverage historical work histories to influence the replacement of items. So with this, some tips. So number 1, you want to set a dollar threshold and stick to it. Decide what is your capital threshold. I've worked with groups where, they look at it as a $5,000 threshold. I've worked with others where it's 10, some as low as 2,000. It'll basically align with your capital budgeting process, but you want to pick a threshold and stick to it. And then you want to break it into chunks if you're doing this yourself. You can't tackle a whole campus, a whole building yourself in 1 week. You'll want to basically say, okay, we're going to address this section of the building, maybe this neighborhood or wing, or this class of asset, like we're going to look at the kitchen equipment today or this week, something like that. You also want to think about this as a multi-departmental initiative. Don't just give this to the facilities team and say, you're responsible for this, they will miss things that are important to clinical or nursing, therapy, dietary. So you can't have one person, typically it is the facilities team that takes the lead because so much of the dollars are tied up on the asset side, but you want to get some input from the other departments. And then also, as you're doing this, consider opportunities for upgrades or the upside of improving what you're replacing things with. This is especially true around energy efficiency. A like-for-like replacement, if your equipment is 20 years old, probably doesn't make sense. Time to start thinking about what's the impact of upgrading what we have, and are there opportunities to, from a cost perspective, really significantly lower the operational cost if we upgrade the equipment. So here's some idea of what these long-term capital plans can look like. Once you've got that data here, I just pulled some samples from the work that we do. There's a rundown of a replacement schedule grouped by asset category. Could have done that by building if I had multi-site, or even drill into subcategories so I can see, specifically within HVAC, how many RTUs or AHUs do I have to replace each year, all the way down to actual asset level. And then step 4, this is where you're setting yourself up for the future. You're really tracking the repair costs. So you've got the capital plan, you've assembled all the information. How do you now inform the immediate needs and the upcoming needs in terms of making decisions around what to actually replace? So 4 or 5 years out, how do I decide where to spend the limited dollars that I have? We decide that with a component of having tracked the repair costs so that I know what internal and external dollars I have spent, or internal and external sources of dollars, so contractors, internal labor, where these folks have spent dollars in terms of the specific assets. And then if I can roll in the parts and labor to that, I get a full picture of what the cost to maintain an asset is, and I can switch to a repair versus replace decision-making model that's based on data. So again, when I hit those years where I can't afford to fund everything, I can prioritize not just based on a gut feel, but on actual data in terms of where things have gone. So that's just a sample of what some of the work we do with folks looks like, where you can pull out the percent of purchase costs spent on specific assets in terms of repair versus purchase cost. So then you've got a bonus step. So we talked about the 4 steps of really getting a capital plan together. If you really want to be great, though, you need to address preventative maintenance. So this is where you get into the idea of creating PM plans, preventative maintenance plans. So as you collect each asset, consider, do we have a maintenance plan in place for it? Are there checks and inspections we should be doing? In no way am I saying that every asset requires a PM plan. There's perfectly logical reasons for not having PM on some assets. But for our more expensive, larger building systems and components, we do want to have that. And when you're doing this, create a simple checklist of what the steps are. All too often, I see organizations let that PM information reside in someone's head. When they depart, we're left with no information in terms of how to do that PM, that job. If we can put that through, then we get the idea of a corporate history being built out for that preventative maintenance task. So that was kind of my view that I wanted to give people on a quick kind of run through of what we've done with others and how we recommend folks approach this. Happy to answer specific questions individually on our process, but really what we thought would be most interesting was to engage in a little bit of a discussion with Amy from Clark Retirement about kind of the process that she's gone through, having just undertaken this on her own. So a couple of just base stats to give you some perspective on Clark Retirement and where Amy comes from. There we go. So Clark Retirement, located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They've got 2 communities, total of about 300,000 square feet. Staff on the facility side is about 10. They run the gamut from independent assisted living and skilled nursing, so a full kind of life plan community. And fun fact, they took part in the first ever senior citizen lip dub in 2011 and actually had a video that went viral with 1.6 million views, and they got some free Michael Bublé tickets for the residents as well. So, Amy, are you there?
I am here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. As we've talked about before, I thought that it would be really great to kind of share with the audience kind of your experiences, starting with the kind of historical capital planning process. What was it like before we started working together, before you really dove in and said, I'm going to tackle this beast?
Yeah, it was a big, overwhelming task for us here. It was our former director of capital projects and facilities, who departed from our corporation about 2.5 years ago. He really steered the ship. He was the one. He had been here for a long time, and he had his own specific way of filing things and his own specific way of keeping track of things that most of the rest of us weren't privy to, nor did we understand. And it was a paper and pencil and file folder type of system with binder clips and rubber bands. There was absolutely no central location for anything. There were just random filing cabinets, and perhaps it's in that one, or maybe it's over there. So it was really hard to figure out, like, how old a boiler was or when it was replaced, and there certainly wasn't any real data on how much repair had been done on it or any of those things. And when we would get down to the crux of something, it would often take me hours and hours and hours of digging through things to try to collect as much information as possible. Sometimes I would have to go back to the finance department and just look for invoices of repairs and things like that. So it was a really big beast to try to figure out how do we get all this a little bit more organized, so a few clicks and I can have the answer for somebody.
Yeah, it's always a challenge when you've got someone's system that they've built in their own head and it's perfect for them, and they depart, and you're trying to pick up the pieces and figure out how they thought. I think in terms of kind of the challenges that you faced, can you expand on that a bit? I think you shared with me a really great story about kind of playing detective or Columbo.
Yes. Oftentimes I would say to my team, well, I got to go play Columbo. I need to find out when this air handler was last serviced or how long that we've had this dishwasher or something like that. So it was, our work order program was old, and it was a paper-based work order program, which meant that you just logged the information into the system and you printed out the paper work orders, and then they again were filed into filing cabinets. So it was a matter of going back through just drawers full of work orders and trying to figure out, is this the dishwasher that was on 3rd floor or 4th floor, and not being a lot of specific information and those types of things. So, and then a lot of the information that I had on these pieces of equipment was just whatever the contractor happened to put on the invoice. Some contractors would put serial numbers and model numbers and give greater detail of what they specifically did, if they replaced a seal or if they replaced an actuator or whatever it was, and give you the information. And then other contractors did not. And there were just binders of, for the preventative maintenance, there were just kind of binders of what manufacturer recommendations when something was installed. They just kind of hand you the, service guide, and it just got put into a binder. So then going back and saying, okay, is this the service guide for the washer on the west wing, or is this the service guide for the washer on the east wing? And just a lot of traveling around the building trying to figure things out.
Yeah, I think that it's something I'm sure everybody can resonate with.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and additionally, there were a lot of, I was going to say, piggybacking on what you were saying about when people leave, we don't have a big turnover rate in our maintenance department. Other facilities may, but we've been fortunate that most of our people stay. But when they do retire, a lot of the preventative maintenance information went with them. It was like, I'm going to change the belts over here in this. Well, what size are the belts? How many belts are there? And then come to find out, well, he was changing the filters, the belts, and lubing this and that. There were multiple steps. So when they leave, there's no documentation of what was supposed to be done, when it was done, how often you do it. So that every time somebody left, I kind of had that little, clinch in my stomach, like, oh no, what are they taking with them?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think in the industry overall, one of the challenges that we face is, from a leadership perspective, an aging workforce. I have a stat that on the facility side, about 50% of facilities leadership is hitting the age of retirement within the next 10 years. So, I think that's something that many people are going to start to experience and see the consequences of. So you're ahead of the curve on solving some of those things.
Yeah.
So so coming into that then, what was, your approach? How did you kind of go about creating your capital plan?
Well, we needed to replace our work order program, and so I knew that we needed a new work order program that would help us manage our day-to-day work orders and our preventative work orders. And then I also, because of having to go play Columbo so many times, wanted to find something that would help me manage those assets. So we started with the maintenance and preventative maintenance first, knowing that we could choose a program that when we were ready, we could start implementing that assets. So that's where we started. Once I had those basics covered with getting our regular work orders in there and our PM schedules going, and getting some links to actually how to perform those PMs and what are the filter sizes and all that kind of stuff. Once we got to there, then we worked on getting our leadership on board with this capital planning idea that, based on the information that we already have in here on the repairs and the preventative maintenance, it can feed into this capital planning program, which will help us. We can just print off a report and say, here's the things that need to be replaced next year, the following year. You can look out several years, so we can start building that. It just made our capital, hopefully will make our capital planning process much, much smoother, instead of kind of going back and, like you said, that gut check, like, oh, was it 2014 that we replaced that boiler, or was it 2012? And come to find out it was 2008. So everybody's mind isn't always really accurate. So once we got that we got our leadership on board with that, then we started with the big chunks. I started with getting my techs on board with this, and it was a little bit of a struggle. I won't lie there. They were like, I don't know if that's really relevant to me. But once I started getting some of those assets in there, so I kind of just, the way I looked at it was, I thought about it. I got to be honest. I thought about it, how to do this best for a while, and I thought, let's start with something small. And we have 10 laundry rooms here. They're like little mini laundromats for our assisted living residents and independent residents. And they have 2 washers and 2 dryers in each of these, and we have 10 of them throughout our main building. And I thought, okay, let's start there. Let's start with those assets and see how big of a job this is really going to be. So I did the legwork. I went and snapped the pictures of their little tags, found some great resources on the internet on how to figure out reading the serial numbers to find out how old it was. Worked with my contractor on how long they should last and how much they cost, and he was able to help me. So we kind of just chunked it out into little segments. So for me, it was laundromats, and then we worked on boiler equipment, then we worked on chiller equipment, and we're actually right now in the middle of doing our main kitchen and pantry equipment. So that's where we're at right now with that.
And I think one of the things that I really liked about your story was that you did chunk it down into sections, so tackling a bit by bit. I could just put on my Outlook calendar, just block myself out 2 hours a time once a week, and my goal was to do 3 laundromats in that 2 hours a time and go gather the information and put it into and maybe that was
maybe that's a lofty goal for some people. Maybe they only have 30 minutes or whatever, but I would put it on my calendar that, and once you do that, it becomes a goal, and that's something that you're going to do. Nobody schedules anything over top of you.
Setting that time aside, try to block it out for all kinds of things. So, I mean, you talked a little bit there about some of the early wins and getting the facilities folks on side. What about, specific advice that you might have for people kind of taking this on?
For us, was using my text. Once I got some of that asset information into there and was linking those work orders and those preventative work orders, and the guys would come in here and they'd say, can you remember when this happened or what? And I had an opportunity to show them on their iPad, like, you can look this information up for yourself. I'm glad always to do it for you, but here, if I'm not here, if you're out in the field, you don't have to run back to the office. So once we got a few assets in there and they were able to, then they were a lot more on board with it. So then we started using, when they were doing their preventative maintenance, I just had a list of pieces of equipment that I needed information from to get to data gather. Of course, I had gone through all the binders and gotten everything I could out of all the paper files that I could find, but I still had gaps of information that I was missing. So I would look through what PMs were coming up for this month and say, hey, while you're doing this PM, can you snap a picture of the serial plate and text it to me? And it takes them 2 seconds, and then I could get that information from them. Another thing I did was I went back to a lot of our contractors. We use outsourced contractors to take care of a lot of our kitchen equipment. So I just called my service tech, and he was really great and talked to me on the phone for quite a while and actually had a lot of historical data of our services that we had done and just sent me over electronically service invoices that for, say, the last year that we had on things, so I could upload those into our system. So I had a little bit of historical data on them. I also used contractors or suppliers, like the laundry rooms. I used the supplier and I went back. We were able to have a great discussion about maybe that's not the right washer and dryer we should be using for these mini laundromats. This would be a much better suited washer and dryer for your building. So just being able to have those conversations. Don't be afraid to ask people. They're willing to help you. They really are. And your techs, they probably know more than you think they do about things. They remember how many pieces of equipment there are. They know how many times it's been serviced. They know who the service tech is that you should talk to at whatever company. So,
yeah, I think that the idea of using the resources that you have is phenomenal. The techs, if you've got people who have been there for a while, will know about the building. And I love how you got them engaged and got them excited about it, so they actually started coming to you to give you info, which is huge.
Yeah,
you changed the mindset.
Actually, this morning I had one of my techs come to me and say, I don't think that these 2 rooftop units are on the asset list. Can you add those for me? Sure, absolutely. I know there's pieces of equipment that I'm missing, but now that I've got them thinking about that, can we add this? This, I think, is something we should track. So.
I think that's something that is huge. And then the fact that your contractors were so willing to engage and give input and advice is another thing that we can forget about sometimes. We can think of them just as folks that we call when we need to get something replaced or serviced. But, a lot of them have that knowledge of what to be fixed and how and can share that with us.
Yeah.
So I think what I'd like to do now is, Lois, we could maybe switch to Q&A.
Absolutely.
And
we have a couple questions that have come in. The first one was, you referred to some capital plans as static. Can you talk more about some practical tips to ensure that these capital plans don't go static?
So, Amy, maybe do you want to talk about how you're kind of going through and updating things? The process that you're going through, I think, is a perfect example of making it so that it's not static. You've got everybody working on it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm in my program on the Works Hub on a daily basis, working on inputting that information and making sure that the PM schedules are in there and the assessments of the pieces of equipment when the preventative maintenance are done, or uploading an invoice when I've had service done. That's a great way to keep it from not being static, because then you can run that monthly report and see how many times you've had service or work done on that piece of equipment. So maybe you need to look at the life expectancy is this, and it was in good condition, but maybe now it's dropped to a fair condition, and maybe we need to bump that up on when it needs to be replaced.
Yeah, I think the idea of, setting up a routine to do checkbacks, close to the end of life is huge for me. I always recommend that, if something's coming up within 3 years of its replacement date, you want to consider, hey, have we done a bunch of repairs, and is it being extended out, and can we adjust that, or is it something that is, maybe not doing so well, we should be thinking about replacing it earlier. That constant checkbacks ensures it never becomes static.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And another question we had was, do you track the appliances in each independent living unit?
Amy, probably
right
for you.
now, right now I do not. We have 69 independent condominiums here, and then we have about 50 independent living apartments in our facility. And I do not go through and track every microwave, refrigerator. They have a stove, a microwave, refrigerator, and a dishwasher in their accommodations. And in the townhomes, we have a washer and a dryer. But I do not track those at this point. It might be something that we get to, but right at this moment, I don't. I don't think I would ever do microwaves ever, because they're just very inexpensive, and I would just replace those on a operational side.
Yeah, I think what I typically see happen relative to appliances like that, the more residential ones, is you'll pick a class or a threshold. Microwaves might be something that you never deal with because those are operational expenses when they have to be replaced. But maybe stoves, fridges, you might consider those. So you build them into a capital plan, but as a group with a phased replacement, not assessing every individual fridge. That could really kind of kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to continue the QA, but just in case folks wanted to drop off, we do have a final exiting poll that we'll put up there, but we'll keep taking Q&A, but if we can put the poll up, Lois, that'd be great. That would allow us to kind of keep going. While we've got that going on, Lois, any other questions?
Sure. There's one more question that we have. I'm in an organization that is looking to start formalizing our capital planning process. What do you hear or see as the biggest obstacles most organizations encounter?
Amy, what was the biggest obstacle for you if you had to pick just one?
I had to pick one obstacle. It was converting everything from paper to software. That it seemed like a mountain I wasn't going to be able to climb. And I really had to think through how I was going to do that. And like I said, I chose for me to chunk it out, to just take little segments, put things on my calendar and say, I'm going to dedicate this 2 hours this week to gathering this information and getting it in there.
Okay. Another question was, Amy, you had mentioned operations budgets. How do you separate operations from capital, or do you?
Yes, we do. Our capital policy is very spelled out. We have a whole policy on what is capital and what isn't, and it has to be approved by our board of directors to be a capital project. So those are already all laid out for us. Operational is our day-to-day expenses, so light bulb replacements, or maybe the parts to repair a toilet or replacing a microwave, those types of things. So our room renovations, any of the capital projects that we've planned, so say for instance replacing asphalt or replacing a roof, those would be those go through the capital planning process with our board of directors and our CFO.
We're going to wrap up. Is there anything else that Amy or Josh you would like to say about the topic before we move on to some closing information?
I'd just like to really thank Amy for taking the time to join us today. It's invaluable to speak with folks who are actually going through it and in the thick of it. So, Amy, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, and we thank both of you for presenting the information. You'll see some information about Dude Solutions on your screen now. We hope you've enjoyed today's webcast. Remember that this session will be available shortly to listen to again online. So if you'd like to listen to it again, or if you think a colleague would benefit from the information, please write down this web address, mcknightseniorliving.com/May30webinar. And you'll see that on your screen now as well. Again, we'd like to give special thanks to Amy Brom and Josh Malbagat for taking the time with us today to frame this important issue in an understandable way for senior living providers. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Dude Solutions, provider of the Works Hub. Visit www.dudesolutions.com to learn more about the company. And thanks to everyone listening today. Your questions were great, and I'm sure helped fellow listeners gain an even better understanding of this topic. Once again, thanks for tuning in. This is Lois Bowers for McKnight Senior Living.